since we've seen each other. We were just chatting offline
Yeah.
that chatting about some people we know in common. And a spoiler alert, I guess, for people watching or listening, we've worked together a couple of times now. Explore back in the day, and Get Set Up a couple of years ago. Sort of another early stage of business you're involved in. But I'm really excited to have this conversation. I think, as I was saying, we've had a lot of people in the product and design space and the leadership space so far on the podcast, but probably not enough engineers. And I think that's probably one of the areas that perhaps non-technical founders struggle with, is understanding a bit more about how to engage engineering teams, what they should be looking for, the software building process as well. So I thought that could be a whole bunch of stuff that we could get into today. And you've worked with a whole bunch of technical and non-technical founders, and hired and managed engineering teams, and sort of helping, I guess, structure to fast-moving sort of product businesses. So I just wanted to get into what founders often miss, what great engineers do, and how teams actually build momentum when nothing's figured out.
Yeah,
perfect. Did you want to just give me 1 or 2 minutes, just a bit of an intro, what about your background and what you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, so I'm currently a staff engineer at Empower, which is recently just rebranded to Tilt. I work for a sub organization that they acquired, which is a Filipino microfinance company, using very much the same model as Empower. But yeah, so we've been building that out. It's a very successful product. We've been modernizing it and bringing it into new infrastructure, because it's been around for quite a long time and needed a shakedown. So that's what I'm working on.
Brilliant. And as I was saying before, you spent some time at Explore, and prior to that at iFlix, which was I was going to say it was a success story in terms of had some real traction, but I think some of the other streaming services in that sort of space really perhaps got funding that sort of saw them overtake a little bit. Would that be fair?
I think that's not particularly in our market in Southeast Asia. We were dominant in Southeast Asia. We were beating Netflix. We were beating WeTV, all the big players in that area, because our primary market was in Indonesia, because Indonesia has very strong modesty laws, and we managed to adapt to that before anyone else would. Netflix wasn't allowed in because they didn't do any censorship or modification and we had a really good team for modestizing, for want of a better word, of all the content. Very, very creative, very clever. So we were allowed in earlier, and that actually also in Malaysia and a few other of the sort of Islamic countries favoured us over the others. So we had a lot more favours in that. But that then ended up making us spread through the rest of Southeast Asia. We were quite dominant. The reason for it, I wouldn't say it didn't succeed. It was eventually acquired by Tencent. But it was part of the brutality of series funding and just the way things were working at that time, and that was leading up to the sort of that minor tech crunch. So there are a lot of things playing in play with that.
But exciting times anyway, and a good product to have been involved with.
Without doubt, the most amazing job, sort of work environment I've had in terms of like scale, organization, rethinking things, and scaling, descaling, all these things, all the experience that I have now came a lot through the iFlix ride.
Perfect, brilliant. Let's make a start then. I'm interested to get your thoughts on, from your perspective, sort of what non-technical founders sometimes get wrong or underestimate when they're hiring sort of engineering teams or early stage engineering teams.
Yeah, well, typically founders come from a space where they've either, like Explore is a good example for that, where the founder has actually started the project themselves, and then they've realised this is going to scale and just get bigger, and they hire the appropriate people, and usually small startup. There's a different type of engineer that you need to use for startup, who's a bit more resilient, a bit more cowboy's not the word, but you're sitting on the edge of that. You're out in the ranges, you're getting stuff put together, so you need a particular person. So generally that gets the product off the ground, or at least to a phase where you can start getting funding to get it off the ground. And that's all cool. The next stage is the stage I think a lot of founders struggle with a bit, And it is, you get your money, you might get some serious funding. The immediate thought is to let's just start hiring a lot of people. And that doesn't necessarily transfer to actually getting your product into a better place. You just need to hire the right people who are, again, you've got your startup people who quite often don't have any product experience. Then there's a whole group of, and I would put myself in this cohort, and that's people that are ready to organize and scale your company. And that's the bit that I think the scaling can be more painful than having to let people go, if that makes sense. And if you don't get that right, you can suddenly be spending way too much money on engineers that are not giving you value. And I don't mean individually, I mean the team is not giving you value, but just by being bigger. We definitely went through that in iFlex, where the team expanded and we realized we're becoming less and less efficient with a larger team. And so I think that's the main thing, is more people doesn't mean more velocity.
And I guess there's some of the engineering practices or some mindsets around things like, this trade-off between progress and stability and speed of delivery not always being the best signal. These are things that I think sometimes founders perhaps struggle to understand, and simply because they don't come from that world. So there's a duty, or I guess a responsibility for someone in the early stage team, founding engineers, to start having those conversations to help founders understand, so they can then set expectations with whoever's funding or go to market teams, like how quickly is this thing going to be ready? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think there's a balance between that, because I think when you're in the funding stage, you need to start putting shiny bells and whistles on things that don't necessarily give functional value for your user base. But I can understand that you need to have them to show market difference for investors or your funders. But then there becomes a time where if you've scaled sort of successfully, you're in a space where you want to move towards IPO or some other sort of structure like that. That's the time where bells and whistles don't mean anything. You need user value, user functionality, and you need to be able to. You need a robust, stable system. And most teams I've worked with have gone through that. Let's just get as much out the door as we can, and then realize this is starting to fall over, and now we need to tighten up and maybe remove some of the bells and whistles in order to do that. And generally, businesses and quite often that is founder driven. Like, this is the phase that we're in. This is what I need from the team, because quite often in the early stage, the product isn't an actual viable product at that point in time. It's a concept. And you need to get that concept out the door, and then you work out what doesn't work, and then you sort of can peel back and get into focus on the core product. I mean, the company I work for at the moment, Tilt, who used to be in Power, they started off as just a budgeting application, and they realized there's a lot of them around and not a lot of value in it, and they pivoted towards microfinance as a model within that subset of that, and they adapted very quickly and pivoted. So the original plan was not what actually executed and ultimately became very successful.
And I guess that's part of the difference in mindset from an engineering perspective for people who've perhaps not been in an early stage business, where finding product market fit and finding viability is the most important thing. Worrying about stability and taking care of technical debt and all that sort of stuff just needs to come later on, because if you don't have viability, you don't have a business, and the technical debt is neither here nor there at the end. So again, I guess it's that that mindset for engineers, particularly early stage teams, which I guess segues nicely into the responsibility of whoever's leading an engineering team in an early stage business to be communicating with founders around timeframes, what is and isn't possible, how quickly features can get released, and I guess working more closely with whoever's leading product.
Yeah. I had a Get Set Up. We had a really healthy relationship in terms of the engineering to business to product. Weekly, I was an engineering manager there, and weekly we would catch up with the product. Myself and product owner or head of product would work out. We had a very lean team in Get Set Up, and we would basically work out what we could get done for the next week against what the priority of the founders were. And so I didn't directly communicate with the founders, but it was very close in terms of the head of product, and she would manage the expectations of the business. about this is what we can achieve. This is what you want, and helping in prioritizing quick pivots, because we get set up as pivoting very frequently. And it was exciting, but it was also a little bit. It required weekly discussions about what are we doing next week, and pretty much not much thought beyond next week or the next 2 weeks, because the speed was so much and the priorities kept changing. And again, new stakeholders were coming into the field, and we had to satisfy what that stakeholder wanted to get them on board. So that was a really exciting and really interesting, but really nice, healthy structure in terms of how we got stuff done.
That kind of environment, though, isn't for everybody, is it? There are some people who that's like total anathema to them. People who want to know what their 5-year development plan looks like, or what their career plan looks like. And I'm not saying that those aren't viable things, and that you're wrong to be worried about those things, but it's a completely different mindset from traditional business to early stage.
Yeah, and that's when you're finding people to work with you, you need to make sure that they're resilient, they can rebound, and they're not too precious, and they're not just wanting to turn up, get a check, and then go home again. I mean, and there are roles for that, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's a mindset that you need. But in the startup / scaling space, you need special types of engineers that are actually understand what the focus is, where we're going, probably have input into that to give you ideas of this is how we can get this done better or cheaper or quicker. And they're different than someone that may have been working in an enterprise organization like Atlassian or a bank or somewhere like that, where there's the highly structured process. There's not a lot of thought or room to move in. I mean, there are pockets of all of these places that go against that, but that's a different type of engineer than the sort of engineer that comes into this environment. And quite often when I've been hiring, you can see this person's been in a structured environment most of their life, and they've been doing it very well, and they're excelling, but I'm not sure that they'd adapt to the lack of structure or more amorphous type of structure that exists in scaling. And
so from a practical day-to-day perspective, what might some of those things be, look like? Would it be like the way they go about testing or not testing, or pushing to prod, or?
So generally when I'm hiring, we have a screening thing, and we go through all those processes. You want them to have the process, but then you can see people that are dependent on the process to get them, and don't have a lot of they don't have a lot of feedback around being able to adapt to what's there, or being able to adapt to the people around them. And that's that is I think that's endemic for engineers that have been in the more corporate enterprise world. And by necessity, you have to have that mindset, like if you're in a corporate. Whereas a startup thing is, some people adapt, but you generally find when you're talking to someone that you need much more structure than they can give you, and that's
and I'm pushing the point a little bit, but when you say structure, people are used to a bit more structure. What specifically do you mean?
I mean, like so the not traditional. You have your agile process. There are many flavors of that, and as one of my previous heads, Christian, used to say, agile isn't a thing. it's a process. So a lot of these larger organizations have an agile process, but it is actually a very structured process. So you go through with the product engineers, a backlog culling, then you go into prioritization. You basically, as part of your 2-week sprint or whatever your cycle is, there's a whole lot of ceremonies in that process which take away the need to think about or decide what you're going to do necessarily. Startup teams generally, I think, prefer not to work in a 2-week cycle, because you may have to pivot at the end of the week. And so you basically work out what you need to do for a week. And then if things, this is where it becomes, if something goes wrong or something doesn't work out the way you want it, the sort of engineers and teams that you want are going, right, let's stop for a tick. Let's refocus on a particular day or in an hour, going, hang on, this has all gone to whatever. Let's have a quick half-hour chat and see how we're going to get out of this. Whereas in a more corporate environment with structure, keep saying corporate, I don't mean that. A more structured environment that would then feed back into the next sprint. You wouldn't actually, you basically stop. Let's think about this in our next ceremony. Whereas startup teams tend to be able to pivot quickly in terms of like, or even just say, okay, we're near the end of the week. This is not going to work. Let's just chuck it out and start on something else, sort of thing. So there's a lot less precious about the work you've done. You've got to be willing to throw stuff away, redo stuff, or just forget about it. Work out that's not going to work.
Yeah, and I guess there's also a thing when you're trying to really find that PMF. You might be getting feedback from a whole bunch of customer surveys where something is an issue that no one realized, and your product manager and whoever's leading engineering and maybe the founder are all going, right, that's a priority to get that thing fixed, because that's a friction point that's stopping user adoption. So as you said, being able to pivot and focus your mind shift to those things, probably super important.
Yeah, and to be honest, any new scaling organization, data should be their first point. Like, let's collect data always, like from the beginning. Let's not add it later on. Let's put the data in, because the data does a few things. It tells you things like that. People aren't getting past this section. Why is that? But it also gives the founders and the stakeholders, people are actually using this part of the app that we never really expected. Maybe we should look a bit more at that. And also you can just push out tests. I've got a hypothesis that this might change something. Let's just push something out quickly, have a look at it, measure it. If it works, let's build it out properly, but let's not put too much effort into it at the beginning stage. And if you're data driven, if you do that from the beginning, I think you've got a better pathway to success, because you start to understand, one, what your users are wanting, two, what are the choke points, and three, maybe this product isn't viable. So it's just.
What's something you wish you'd learned early about helping sort of teams move forward?
I think that is the breakdown of structure, sort of like the understanding, building resiliency in teams, both individually and as a team. I've been in teams where you go, the business has changed its mind, we want to go this way, and everyone throws their hands up, puts their heads in their hands and go, this is dreadful. We just spent 3 weeks on this work. Whereas a good resilient team goes, yeah, cool, let's just move on and let's keep going. And that, it's actually not that difficult to build, but it's not the way engineers and again, more traditional teams are structured in terms of valuing the work you do. You should value the work you do, but you also shouldn't be too precious about it. You need to be able to let it go and move on. And I think that makes giving team resilience actually starts at giving teams accountability. So a good example of we had a bit of a bottleneck in one of the places I worked where there was only one product manager, but there were 3 or 4 teams feeding into that product manager or product UX designer actually. And basically we managed that by saying to the team, like an engineer, if you see that something doesn't work, don't go back through the product owner. Make a decision, make a solution. Worst case is the product owner is not going to like it. We're going to have to redo it. But 9 times out of 10, they've found a solution that they don't have to solve. So that's the sort of thing I mean in terms of structured environments. In a structured environment, you don't do that. Everything has to go through a chain of command before it gets back to production.
So in that instance, like some relatively minor documentation around what the problem was, how you fixed it, put somewhere that you can refer to later on when someone says, hey, the thing's blue now, like what happened, like whatever. How do you screen for that though? So when you're potentially interviewing engineers who've come from other early stage startups, when you're asking them to describe the environment, and they're describing the very things that you're talking about, they've probably built up a bit of resilience. But when someone hasn't come from that sort of environment, how do you screen for that? And I guess more importantly, how do you communicate that this is what it's like without it sounding terrifying to people?
Well, you do. You have that frank discussion. This is probably going to be different than what you're working in, and there are sort of subtle tricks you can do in the interview process where you're actually rattling them a little bit or unsettling them to see how they respond. We tend to do that a bit more in the technical phase rather than the screening phase, where you can see quickly whether the person can adapt. Like, this is not working. Some of the best hires we've had are people that have had just, I remember one guy, everything, we had our live coding tests, we had all these tools in place to actually help. Everything broke in the process, and it was not on him, it was on us, like, it was on the infrastructure we were using. And he just kept, right, let's deal with this and we'll just keep moving on. And all he did was just, okay, that's not going to work. Let me try this. That's not going to work. And that was showed to us more than anything. He didn't complete the technical, I think we barely got into it, but the fact that he just kept plugging away and thinking about ways around the problem that were in front of him, actually just sold us on him.
Basically, the best real world scenario you could have given him unintentionally.
Yeah.
Cool. And so I think that's one of the things that that I, if I'm screening engineers, I go to great pains to explain is, that sometimes the path forward isn't particularly clear. You're going to have the autonomy to make decisions, right or wrong, some documentation and get on with it. Sometimes when I'm just explaining that to people, you can see the drains out of their face, but some people get really energized by that. And I think for me, you can pretty much tell if someone's worth pursuing based on their reaction to that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's move to talking about senior engineers, because I guess sort of senior engineers or always sort of top of the pile when it comes to hiring. Like every startup wants to hire seniors because they can just move things quicker. I think what a lot of founders sometimes don't understand is that the value in a senior or a staff engineer, someone like yourself, isn't just about the technical decisions, but it's about creating the clarity and the ability to help decide which things to focus on for others. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. Well, the first one, the senior is really interesting in that there are a lot of people that believe they're senior because they've done a lot of years, and they're not necessarily done a lot of years in an environment that gives you senior perspective. The classic thing of most seniors, and in terms of people moving into management and stuff like that, you need to have seen the worst of things and the best of things, because if you've been in a happy path your whole life, it makes it much more difficult to make a decision about, there are some risks around this and it's either going to go horribly wrong or it could go a little bit bad and we may be able to deal with it. I think a senior is a much more pragmatic mindset, a good senior, and they're less prone to, we have this joke with one of my previous line managers around engineers that want to continually move the furniture around. And that tends to be more of a thing around a junior bleeding into, or sort of probably a mid-engineer, where they want to refactor all the code before they actually start on anything. And an engineer will just go, a senior engineer is more like, well, we just need to get this done. And I can get this done by changing this. I understand it's not the best of decisions, but let's move on. But having that decision, understanding that decision matrix is, we can just deal with this pile of sticks or whatever, and it's not going to cause us problem down the road. But there may be a case of where if you pull the stick out, it's all going to fall apart, and maybe that's going to inhibit us going on forward. And so maybe we should actually stop and reset the furniture so that things are more stuck. But the senior engineers understands when there's a time for that. Like, when do I take some time out to refactor? And again, it depends on your environment. Again, in startup, it's more like, let's just keep moving. That pile of sticks we can just skirt around. We'll come back if we have time to later. And so it's really the senior engineer is good at making informed decisions based on their experience that keep propelling forward. And I think you don't get that from juniors and you don't get that from mids quite often. And we always used to lament in iFlex that because of the speed we were moving and the size we just lacked the capacity to hire junior or mid developers. We basically had to hire senior developers because we didn't have time. Like, everyone was working. There was no one, a junior developer or a less so a mid, requires a fair bit of mentorship and training and people spending time with them. And I think in a larger organization, you can actually afford that time. In a leaner team, you really need senior engineers to get things moving. As a team scales out into larger teams, you can start to bring on junior and mid engineers and work them through. And so it's a bit of we used to always lament it at iFlix, but I don't think there was any way we could have done what we did at iFlix without taking that mindset.
I think there's a couple of things there that I want to just continue the discussion on. One with senior engineers, I think this thing of there's this debate on LinkedIn and anywhere else where people are talking about careers. This thing that years of experience don't matter. It's what you can actually build and do that's the most important. And I totally understand that line of thinking, and I agree with it with a caveat and to a degree. I think years of experience, particularly in engineering and in product environments, exposes you to really, I think what you've described, really difficult situations, tricky decisions to make, and not perfect situations that just experience as you progress through and you experience more of those things, teaches you so much when you get to a senior engineer. You've been in this scenario before, you've seen what works, you've seen what doesn't, and that sort of experience literally only comes with the more time you spend doing the job. So again, I agree with the notion that experience isn't the only, years of experience aren't the only thing that matters, but there is something to be said for hiring people who've been through the ringer a little bit, and you as a founder can benefit from all those years of experience. So I think that's one thing. I think I also agree with you on the lamenting the ability to hire juniors. For an early stage business, you just don't have the time. And once you've found product market fit, and maybe the frantic nature of just trying to get viability has passed, and now you're about responsibly scaling, maybe that's the time to be bringing on juniors. It's a tough thing though, isn't it? Because we need more engineers in the industry here. We need to build our own talent here. But then we've got probably arguably the most exciting part of our industry saying we can't hire you right now. It's one of those things that's always irked me about this space. This is the space that the youngsters want to get involved in, but super early stage just isn't the right place for them because no one's got the time for them. I don't know what the right answer is.
There's the rare person that you'll hire at an early stage, and I can think of a few through the people I've hired that you realise they have the internal or intestinal fortitude to, even as a junior, that they will power on and get through it. And but they're a very rare thing in terms of that. And I think it's like anything. To get into the good, exciting stuff, you do have to do a bit of your pay your dues in a sort of more, standard environment. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I guess the risk for someone coming in with that mindset, where if they move into a more sort of larger, more structured environment, is not getting stuck in that environment, like it's stuck in the rut of this is okay. I turn up, I get told what to do, and I walk away. That's okay for the short term, but I think you also need to be thinking, like, I need to stretch myself early. That's a conversation I've had a lot with engineers, particularly in the space that I've been working in. Is I could go and work for a bank and get paid, a lot more than what I'm being paid now. And my conversation with them is, yeah, you can, and that's fine. But once you've gone there, you're never going to come back to this space because you're going to get used to the money. You're going to get used to there's all these things that you just get used to that you will find very difficult to adapt back into the startup space if that's where you want to be. And I've had quite a few senior engineers coming from that, particularly the bank space, where they're like, I'm sick of this. I want to get out of it and I want to get back into the startup world and all that. And they're the sort of people you want. But when they actually see the compo and the actual thing, well, maybe I can't do that because my lifestyle is scaled to a point where I can't actually scale down. Not saying that there's a major haircut that you have to take, but some people are working on the margins and they're being paid very well in certain sectors, certainly the gambling and banking sectors. People are being paid very well. and then the rest of us aren't being paid quite like that. And so the step down is actually quite difficult, which is unfortunate because there's some of the people in those sectors are really the people you want, because they have been through the ringer and they may have been institutionalized most of their life, but they understand a lot of these structural. And when you get to a certain phase, you want people to understand structure and where it works and where it doesn't.
Yeah, and I guess that ties into, are people extrinsically or intrinsically motivated? I think, broad brush statement, I think when we're younger, we're extrinsically motivated by external things and recognition and pay and all that sort of thing. I think as we get a bit older and experience a bit more the satisfaction of doing a good job, being there for your teammates, solving interesting things, and helping a business succeed and being part of a success story, is that more sort of intrinsic motivation. Some people stay exclusively on one side and on the other, but I think generally we all sort of fluctuate between them based on a whole bunch of other environmental, family factors that we're going through. So anyway, what are some quiet signals that founders might miss about engineering teams that are doing really great work?
I think that you need to understand when your team's actually delivering, and there's a lot of that's what my role and people around me's role as managers at the time would. You just need to build trust. Like we can't necessarily, like a lot of things, a lot of businesses and founders, I want this by this week. When can you give me this? When can you give me this? And like, generally my attitude is I can only tell you what I can deliver in the next 1 week, 100%. The next 2 weeks, 80 to 70%. A month, 50%, and beyond that, I don't know. So I would prefer not. I mean, you can have a roadmap, but that needs to be a running conversation of this is what we can deliver, and that's the thing in the early phase. I think frustrates founders. Why can't you get this done by this time? And sometimes you can say, well, here's the trade-offs we need to get to there, or trust me, and and generally the teams that I've worked with have delivered before they said they would, but they wouldn't give a long-term. And it was only because we did that we had the trust in the business to say, okay, that team can actually deliver, as opposed to this team can give me a really impressive roadmap with milestones, but they never achieve it. Which one's better? It's very few teams or organizations that have a long-term roadmap. I've very rarely seen them actually hit every milestone and deliver everything they said in there. But I do understand it's a motivating principle for the rest of the engineering team and the product team, is that we want to be seen to be maybe overstretching what we can achieve. I think that's a good thing, but I also think that just being able to say, like, within the next month, this is going to happen. Next month, this is going to happen. I know that doesn't necessarily work when you're in a funding space. Like if you want a map of where we're going, and I know Explore had that, but they were also better at dealing with short-term delivery than the others. But they had stakeholders, education organizations that wanted to know when was this feature going to come into. And if it was an important feature, we go, right, well, let's get this done now. And so and this is wherever you go, sales is promising things to people that sometimes don't necessarily exist. And if the sale has been made on that principle, then the pressure comes back onto the product and engineering department.
We know a product manager, Jared Karinko, who's probably balanced a whole bunch of that sort of stuff. That's another good segue. Sort of this, what really good collaboration between product design, sales looks like. The leaders of those functional leaders being really clear on how they're working together and what's communicated and what isn't. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think I've had two really good product owners, managers, heads, which they're pretty much filling the whole role from different ends of the spectrum. So Jared is a good example. Jared came from a technical background, and so he he understood and trusted conversations around why can't you get this done? And it's like, because of this, this, and this. And if he knew that you were, or thought that you were just having a land and making excuses, he knew that. And so he held you accountable the whole time. He also understood, like, he was very good at, like, I've worked really well with Jerry, because he would like, let's forget about that. Let's go down this path and what's required, and having good, honest conversations around that. And that a lot came from his technical background and technical understanding of what and understanding of what the team's capable of. It's not just around technically what's viable. What is this team capable of? The second would be Viv. She was at Get Set Up, and she came from a different perspective. She was not technical. She had trust in my technical ability, but also understand what the business want. And we would have this. She was the one that we had this weekly discussion around, what can we get done next week? This is what the business wants. What do I need to manage them off? And what do I need, or what can you deliver with the resources you've got? And it may be a case of like, let's move this guy over onto this project and we can get this done. And so we had a roadmap, but it was a malleable roadmap where we would, at the end of the week, we would reshuffle the blocks and make sure that the business was happy and that the engineers could get done what we actually wanted to do.
Nice. Jared was a good hire. I wonder who hired him. Just going back to engineers for a second, I'm keen to get your thoughts on when you're interviewing engineers. Are there any sort of standout sort of red or green flags for you? And I'm talking from a technical capability, not necessarily he or she is a bit of a knobhead or whatever. Like any sort of red or green flags that sort of in interviews, do you think other people should be aware of?
It's hard to actually like classify the red flags. It's generally, I mean, I have one good one, which was an extreme red flag. At one point, I was hiring an iOS engineer, and technically very capable, had done some really interesting work. But when we got down to what would your week look like? He goes, well, you need to let me do everything. I need to do all the hiring. I need to do all these things. And it's like, well, that's actually my role. So there's some people actually just are, and thankfully very honest about what their expectations are, what they want. And generally, if you ask someone, what are your attitudes around this? They'll be honest. And then you can, and it's not about like, you're not the person for us. I think it's just, I don't think you're going to fit here in terms of that mindset. And it's just general. My favorite one, and I'm just as fault is the guy was very good, very positive, and then said, well, can you tell me a bit about the work culture there? I go, yeah, we're hard workers. We get stuff done. We tend to favor our workhorses over show ponies. And he said, let me stop you right there. I'm not going to come on with you. I just want to stop this with you now. And I'm like, why? He goes, well, I don't trust people. And he sort of had a point, but at the same time, I think he was a show pony. It was like, I don't trust people that want workhorses. You just grind people into the ground. And it's just like, well, fair call, but that's not how we work. And it's like, if you don't want to continue, we won't continue. So there are certain things that just flare up that are really obvious with people. And it's context driven. Like everyone's got a place. Every engineer, there's some place for them. But what you're doing when you're hiring is, I understand the context. I understand the existing team. Is this person going to fit in with that team and culture? And it's not. There's not one thing that a red flag, but I mean, a good simple red flag is you've been in a structured environment your whole life. This is a completely unstructured environment. I'm not sure you're going to handle it. And then have that discussion. And generally out of that, you can actually tell via the conversation, the naivety versus reality of like, and sometimes those people like give you the right answer and you think, well, let's give them a go.
I've had, not so much recently, but I think probably in that real boom, probably sort of 2018, 2019, where just before COVID, where everything was, we thought it was nuts then, and then COVID happened in 2021. everything's just amped up. But I had this trend of engineers refusing to do any sort of technical testing. Now I'm interviewing a whole bunch of places. I'm sick of doing technical tests. You're just going to have to take me at my word for it. Happy to do a technical interview of some kind, but I'm not doing technical testing, which I kind of understood. At the time, we weren't really set up. The company I was hiring for then, we weren't really set up to start accommodating a whole bunch of different requirements. So we had to let a few people go, rightly, wrongly. Is he not there? What are your thoughts on technical testing for?
It's a nightmare, because it's you need to know what not even the skills. You assume that someone's been in the industry for 10 years, that they have enough to get by, but it's whether they've got the ability. Again, it's it actually technical in a lot of the things that I've done has been around, is this person going to adapt to the way we work? And I think the good technical exams that I've done myself are along those lines. We're not trying to work out how good you are at coding. We want to know how you think about coding and how you deal with a response. The problem is getting that kicked off. So we used various places I've worked. We had a few approaches. One is, here's a simple technical assignment, get it done, and then send it back to us. We'll review it, and if we like the look of it, we'll bring you in and talk about that, and that forms the point of the conversation. Another one was just like an extended code review, which is a little bit simpler. You're not having to write code; you're just having to comment on an existing code base, written by me. So tell me how bad I am.
It's terrible.
And that works, but it also takes time. And you understand that people are busy; they've got families they've got to do. They don't want to spend their weekend doing a technical assignment. Bringing them in cold for a conversation, that can work. One of the most effective ones, but the one I think is the most difficult to set up for, and you have to have the right interviewers and you have to have the right tools, is just a quick live coding test. And that actually really exposes a lot about the personality of the person, their ability to problem solve, and they're under stress and pressure, and how do they deal with that. So there's no prep required for that, but it is more harrowing, and it's less common in Australia for that to happen. And I think it freaks people out. I've had to do them. I've definitely executed a few of them, and that was, you found out a lot more in that live coding in a short period of time. So you have a quick technical discussion, maybe then go through an actual an exercise. The other one I have a problem with is people just, and we used to do this a bit in some of our interviews, like, tell me about your favorite architectural pattern, or what do you think about this? What about inversion of all that stuff is interesting, but if that's the one thing that anyone can swat on, you can basically find the stock standard answers for that, in 10 minutes of just doing some pre-reading and assuming that that's what they're the questions you're going to ask. And so just being able to answer those questions tells me nothing about your ability to be an engineer. It tells me about it tells me about your opinions on development, but it doesn't tell me much more about your actual daily practice.
I'm mindful of time, but it would be remiss of us to wrap this up without talking about AI. Where are you seeing AI affecting building code or applications? People using AI in job applications and that sort of thing.
There's a fair few prongs on it. Our Tilt and Cascialo, which is the group that I work with, we're very pro AI, and particularly Cascialo team. That's very small. We've got an Android engineer, an iOS engineer, a few back-end engineers. So we need all help we can get, and we use it from reviewing our code, generating code, getting much more into generating code and moving through things a lot quicker. That requires understanding how the tools you are using work, and there's a lot of different tools, and they all work slightly differently. I think you need an experience, back to the senior engineer, you need experienced engineers to do it, because you can actually see, no, that's not going to work, or that's not working. Can you try this? So that's one end of it. I think it as a productivity tool, it's just, in a lot of ways, it's an uber super big auto completion. Being the auto completion is a complete module of work, if potentially. So I think that's good. I think the grey area is actually in that doing your technical exams with AI. Now, I think there is 2 rungs to that. One is it's going to become increasingly important for us to not understand that you can use AI effectively. And I don't necessarily think I would think any less of someone that produced a beautiful technical result that they didn't necessarily understand against someone who's built a pretty good technical result that they understand completely. It's starting that the need to understand completely what you're doing is it's a difficult one. I still think there's a way to go to adapt, and definitely until sort of half the engineers are fully in, and the other half of the engineers are still a little bit skeptical. And I think that very much depends on your domain. I think, I've used it a lot, and there is a risk of not completely getting understanding the code and just having blind faith. It just means you have to test a lot more. So I think there's challenges there, but I think where a lot of us are adapting very quickly to using it. And I know one of the guys I work with, who's a sort of intern, early junior, he's at university, and the universities are really anti-AI. And I'm wondering how long that attitude is going to. It's like the equivalent of back when I was a child. Calculators. Could you bring your calculator into a maths test or not? And now it's accepted that calculator is not going to diminish your math skills.
So, I think there's a lot of wait and see what happens with this whole space, isn't there? But it's just moving so quickly. I think everyone's got an opinion about it. So others are. Some people are really on board with it. Others not so much. But I don't think there's any stopping it, is there?
No.
Tim, this has been brilliant. We could literally sort of talk all day. We've probably got better things to do. Thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it. Anything else for me? Any final parting shots?
No, I think like you said, it's been a great chat. I could go on for the rest of the day around these subjects.
Brilliant. Thank you, my friend. Take care.
No worries. Bye.